A certain man, widely regarded as the useless eldest son of the Param family, bore a reputation that overshadowed him. He was seen as uncontrollable, a reclusive swordmaster confined to his room, often dismissed as a madman. His name was Gin Param. Amidst the chaos, a knight clad in armor trembled in pain, struggling to comprehend the reality of his defeat. He had fallen to Gin, someone he had considered nothing more than human garbage. The thought was inconceivable. As the finest knight in the north, how could he have been bested by such a man? Surrounding him lay the lifeless bodies of several others who had met the same fate. As the injured knight quivered, another figure approached. This newcomer, clad in fine armor and wielding a massive axe, observed the scene with cold detachment. He remarked on the substantial expense he had incurred in setting up the traps, his tone devoid of emotion. His icy gaze bore into the injured knight as he casually asked if the surroundings were to his liking. Enraged, the knight struggled to accept that someone like Gin, whom he deemed a worthless bastard, could have orchestrated such a scheme. Through clenched teeth, he demanded to know if Gin had foreseen everything. Without hesitation, Gin stepped closer, his expression unyielding, and revealed that he had anticipated every detail. He spoke of knowing their numbers, the identities of their spies, and even the source of their reinforcements. With chilling calm, he informed the knight that every move had played directly into his hands. Overwhelmed by the revelation, the knight refused to believe it. Raising his voice, he declared that he always had a hidden ace up his sleeve and demanded to know how someone as insignificant as Gin could have orchestrated such a victory. But before he could finish, Gin silenced him with a brutal kick to the face. "Stop talking," he commanded. Removing his opponent's helmet, Gin made his intentions clear. He would not only win this battle, but every war to come. Smiling, he confidently stated that victory was assured because he held every plan necessary for triumph. The narrative shifted to a year earlier, inside a soldier's camp near the Param estate, within the kingdom of Lithuania. In one of the tents, Gin awoke abruptly, his heart pounding as he realized he was still alive. Instinctively, he reached for his neck, his fingers trembling as he confirmed his survival. His mind raced, memories flooding back to him. The last thing he remembered was kneeling in defeat, his sword knocked from his grip, blood dripping from his mouth. Above him had stood a knight, distinguishable by his red hair and golden armor. That knight, known as the noble warrior Eden, was one of the 7 strongest men on the continent. With a voice heavy with finality, Eden had declared the war over. Pointing his sword at Gin's throat, he had asked if the defeated man had any last words. Struggling for breath, Gin had admitted his only regret, his failure to fulfill his vengeance. But with defiant resolve, he had added that he hoped Iden would meet his end as well. The noble knight had merely smirked, dismissing Gin's words as arrogance. He had gone on to taunt him, revealing that he knew of Gin's past, the fact that he was the eldest son of the fallen Parum household, the same son who had abandoned his family after the death of his sister. Gin had been taken aback. How could a man from a different kingdom know so much about him? Eden, reading his surprise, had explained that he had worked tirelessly to track him down. Then, with a cruel smile, he revealed something even more shocking. The Parum family's downfall had not been the work of one enemy alone. The Duke Deline household had not acted alone. Iden and his allies had conspired to bring them down. Gin had been stunned by this revelation. His mind reeled, struggling to process the weight of the betrayal. But before he could react, Iden had raised his sword, pressing the blade against his throat. "No need for more words," he had said coldly. "Accept your fate." But Gin had refused. Filled with fury, he had vowed never to forgive him. Unmoved by his defiance, Iden had struck the decisive blow, severing his head with a single stroke. The scene abruptly shifted back to the present. Gin stumbled forward, his breath ragged as he reached for a barrel of water. Gazing into its reflective surface, his hands trembled as he confirmed that his head was still attached. Confusion gripped him. Was he hallucinating? His mind struggled to reconcile what had happened. Looking around, he realized something even stranger. He appeared younger than he remembered. Suspicion gnawed at him. Had he been captured? Used as an experiment by mages? If so, he would make them pay. His eyes fell on a sword resting beside the barrel. His fingers twitched as he considered his next move. But before he could act, a voice called out to him. "Young master!" A figure entered the tent, his tone calm yet firm. He stated that he knew Gin was awake and urged him to come outside. The man, Ricardo, a soldier serving the Param household, stepped closer. Gin reacted instantly. In a flash, he moved behind Ricardo, pressing the sword against his neck. Startled, Ricardo froze, but rather than panic, he simply sighed. "Young master," he said, his tone steady, "you're crossing a line." Gin narrowed his eyes. Despite the blade at his throat, Ricardo remained unfazed. For the first time since awakening, uncertainty flickered through Gin's mind. With surprising nonchalance, Ricardo shoved Gieson back and pointed out that he'd exhausted himself earlier with a tantrum before passing out. He then reminded Gieson of his earlier outburst about wanting to lead a raid against the orcs. Still disoriented, Gieson accused Ricardo of talking nonsense, but Ricardo remained unfazed. Picking up a bag, he instructed Gieson to pack, explaining that others were waiting. Unease crept into Gieson's voice as he asked where they were going. Ricardo, already walking past him, replied without looking back, "The Perum estate." Stunned, Gieson grabbed Ricardo, demanding clarification. "You mean that Perum estate?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The scene shifted. Now standing atop a cliff, Gieson stared at the estate in the distance. It was unmistakably the Perum estate. But something was wrong. It looked untouched, pristine. Yet, in his memory, he had seen it burn to the ground. How could it still be standing? Ricardo, stepping closer, eyed Gieson with suspicion. "What's with you? Having a nightmare?" he asked. He scoffed at the idea of calling the Perum estate fallen, warning that the Count would have him thrown out for such words. But Gieson barely heard him. His mind reeled. This had to be a dream. Pinching his cheek, he winced at the sharp pain. Reality sank in. It wasn't a dream. His reflection confirmed it. His face was younger, untouched by the scars of war. His estate was whole. And in that moment, the truth hit him. He had returned to the past. Memories of his younger self surged forward. Resentment toward his family, his immaturity fueled by inferiority, the constant criticism that drove him away. He had left, survived countless battles as a mercenary, and earned a fearsome reputation. But when he finally returned home, there was nothing left. His estate, his family, gone. Now standing before it once more, intact and unscathed, relief flooded through him. A laugh burst from his lips, uncontrollable, teetering on the edge of madness. He almost wanted to sing, but the moment was fleeting. Ricardo's words from earlier resurfaced in his mind. A raid. On the orcs. His blood ran cold. He remembered that raid. The disaster. The deaths. In his past life, he had joined the mission eager to prove himself. Reports claimed there were only 3 orcs. Overconfident, he insisted on leading. But when the squad encountered over 20, it turned into a massacre. Nearly everyone perished. Not this time. He would change the outcome. He would handle the monsters strategically. Orcs weren't cunning, but their brute strength made them deadly. However, earning the trust of soldiers who saw him as a failure would be just as difficult. Lost in thought, he was jolted back to reality by a thunderous crash. A wooden guard post flew through the air and slammed into the ground before him. A soldier screamed, "Orcs! We're under attack!" Chaos erupted. Men scrambled to form defensive lines. Gishin's heart pounded. They're early. This wasn't how it happened before. He watched in horror as massive, hulking figures tore through the ranks, their weapons cleaving through armor with terrifying ease. Among the chaos, a voice cut through the panic. "Hold formation!" It was Skoven, the squad's commander, clad in blue armor. He barked orders, rallying the men to stand their ground. But as he stepped forward to engage, an orc swung its massive weapon. Skoven barely managed to block, but the sheer force knocked him back. His face twisted in realization. This was an ambush. There were far more orcs than they had been led to believe. Before he could recover, another orc loomed behind him, ready to strike. A voice rang out. "Watch out!" A figure shoved Skoven aside just as the axe came down. It was Gishin. Skoven's eyes widened in shock. His young master had thrown himself into the fray. As the orc's weapon descended, Gishin moved with precision. He stabbed the creature's hand, severing its fingers in one swift motion. The beast roared in agony, staggering back. Without hesitating, Gishin followed up with a sharp slash to its thigh, halting its advance. Soldiers froze, staring in disbelief. The orc collapsed, howling in pain. But Gishin wasn't satisfied. His attack had been weaker than he expected. "Mana, I still can't use it yet." Frustration boiled within him. If only he had returned sooner. Turning to Skoven, his voice was firm. "Give me a weapon." Amid the chaos of battle, Gin turned to the commander with an audacious request. He wanted command of the squad. Skoven, caught off guard, could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had always seen Gin as reckless, but demanding leadership in the heat of combat, with soldiers' lives hanging in the balance, was beyond reckless. It was outright madness. Standing his ground, Skoven refused. The authority to lead was not something to be tossed aside, especially not during a life-or-death struggle. Gin, though annoyed, understood. If an inexperienced fool had approached him with such a demand, he likely would have reacted the same way. But before he could argue further, an orc lunged at him. "Fall back," Skoven ordered, convinced Gin had no place in the fray. But Gin didn't move. He took a stance. Then, to everyone's shock, he hurled his sword. Skoven instinctively dodged, spinning to demand an explanation, but before he could speak, a sickening sound behind him made him freeze. He turned to see Gin's blade lodged deep in the orc's skull. The beast crumpled, lifeless. The commander stared at the fallen creature, then at Gin. "How?" Gin didn't bother answering. Instead, he addressed Skoven directly. "Victory on the battlefield isn't just about skill. It's about morale. If the soldiers are paralyzed by fear, they've already lost." Skoven glanced at his men, shaken, hesitant, on the verge of breaking. Gin smirked and seized the moment. Without waiting for permission, he sprinted forward, yanked his sword from the orc's skull, and launched himself into the heart of the enemy. Gasps rang out as he landed atop another orc, driving his blade straight through its head. Standing on its corpse, he bellowed, taunting the remaining orcs, daring them to face him. "Come on, you pathetic beasts! I'll kill every last one of you!" The orcs snarled, their fury ignited. They turned their attention to Gin, rushing him in a frenzied charge. Unfazed, he danced between them with deadly precision, slicing open the stomachs of two, severing the arm of another, cutting through them with efficiency no one expected. Blood sprayed, heads rolled, and in mere moments, he had turned the tide. From the sidelines, Skoven watched in stunned silence. Even with his mastery of mana, he found it difficult to take on orcs with such ease. Yet here was Gin, a young man who, as far as anyone knew, lacked mana entirely, cutting them down like a seasoned warrior. But Scoven noticed something else. Gin was tiring. His movements, once sharp and fluid, became smaller, more calculated. He wasn't just swinging wildly. Every strike targeted weak points with surgical accuracy. That's when Scoven realized the truth. Gin wasn't fighting like an amateur desperately trying to survive. He was fighting like a master, a swordsman who had perfected his craft without ever relying on mana. Even as exhaustion set in, Gin didn't stop. He taunted the orcs, laughing, claiming he wasn't even warmed up yet. From the sidelines, Ricardo watched in horror as the orcs, now enraged, charged at Gin in full force. A soldier beside him pointed out what seemed obvious. Gin was retreating. Ricardo's heart pounded. Scoven! Scoven narrowed his eyes, watching the battlefield unfold. No, he muttered, he's drawing them in. Gin's sudden sprint toward the cliff puzzled Scoven. The path led straight to the edge, and as realization struck, Scoven understood his young master's intent. Wasting no time, he commanded his troops to form a shield wall and prepare to follow. At the cliff's edge, Gin braced himself against the relentless assault of the orcs, silently hoping that Scoven, with his keen strategic mind, would discern his plan. Though he would have preferred to handle the orcs himself, his stamina was nearly depleted. With a faint smile, he reassured himself that he had done enough. As if on cue, the orcs turned at the sound of advancing soldiers. Scoven and his men, spears raised, their shield wall unyielding, charged forward. The sight caused the orcs to hesitate. Seizing the moment, Gin grinned and declared the timing perfect. Without hesitation, he leapt off the cliff. The instant Gin vanished from sight, Scoven shouted the order. His troops surged forward, driving their spears into the monsters and forcing them back. Overwhelmed, the orcs tumbled one by one over the edge, their massive bodies crashing to the ground below, staining the earth with blood. As the dust settled, the soldiers stood in stunned silence, marveling at their victory. They had triumphed against overwhelming odds. But Scoven wasted no time in celebration. He rushed to the cliff's edge, calling out for Gin. Relief flooded him when he spotted his young master clinging to the rock face, his sword embedded deep to hold him steady. Gin, breathing heavily, managed a weak smile. Scoven stretched out his hand to help him up, but Gin's strength had run dry. His fingers slipped before he could grasp Scoven's hand. The sword came loose, and Gin plummeted into the abyss. Scoven and his soldiers could do nothing but watch in horror. Darkness swallowed him, and then a hazy memory surfaced. A familiar voice called his name. He knew it at once. It was Elena. Visions of his sister flooded his mind, her tear-streaked face when their mother died, her gratitude for his care, the bitter words she once hurled at him claiming she hated him. The memories blurred, and suddenly he saw a much younger Elena, tugging at his sleeve, begging to go with him. Gin's eyes snapped open. He was lying in a room, a damp cloth resting on his forehead. The realization dawned. His soldiers had managed to save him. Relief washed over him, but the dream's lingering presence unsettled him. Attempting to sit up, a sharp pain shot through him, his body trembling from the toll of battle. The door creaked open and a white-haired maid entered. Belinda. Her face lit up with relief as she spotted him awake. Setting a bucket down, she scolded him gently, reminding him that she had warned him to leave the battle to the soldiers. Before she could say more, Gin suddenly lurched forward, pulling her into a tight embrace. Belinda froze, startled by her master's uncharacteristic display of affection. Confused, she asked if she had done something to offend him, but Gin only tightened his grip, assuring her that he was simply happy to see her. Since childhood, Belinda had been his personal tutor, standing by his side despite his reckless antics. Yet in his past life, after the Perum family fell to ruin, she had vanished. He never saw her again. Belinda, still perplexed, remarked that they saw each other every day. Why was he acting as if they had been apart for years? Gin hesitated. He felt an urge to tell her the truth. His expression grew serious as he urged her to listen carefully. A catastrophe would soon befall their family. Belinda frowned, uncertain of his meaning, and pressed him for an explanation. Gin met her gaze. "I died," he said, "and I came back to life." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Belinda laughed, assuming he was exaggerating due to his brush with death. Gin shook his head. "I'm not talking about the battle with the orcs." But she dismissed his words, urging him instead to focus on his recovery. Frustration stirred within him. She didn't believe him. Sensing his mood, Belinda changed the subject. She playfully asked what he would have done if his injuries had kept him from attending the upcoming festival. Gin blinked. The festival? Belinda reminded him that Elena had been eagerly waiting for this day, to go to the festival with him. It was the perfect chance for them to mend their strained relationship. Gin's gaze drifted to a framed picture of himself and his sister. Memories of the annual festival surfaced. In his previous life, his trauma had kept him from ever enjoying it. "When does it begin?" he asked. Belinda smiled. "Next week." Gin's breath caught. A week from now. That was the day his life changed forever. Lost in thought, he barely registered the sound of footsteps approaching. The door opened. Gin turned and froze. Elena stood before him. Gin darted forward without hesitation, wrapping his arms around his younger sister. Belinda and Elena both froze, eyes wide with surprise. Elena, taken aback by her brother's sudden display of affection, stiffened before shoving him away. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her expression caught between confusion and suspicion. "I missed you," Gin admitted earnestly. Elena recoiled, dusting off her clothes. "Creepy," she muttered, eyeing him warily. Gin, stunned by both her words and the sheer strength behind her push, barely managed to steady himself. He'd never realized just how strong she was. Shaking off the moment, Elena explained her presence. "Belinda asked me to come," she said, her tone growing sharp. "Now tell me, what game are you playing? You think this changes anything?" Gin blinked, genuinely lost. "What are you talking about?" Elena's gaze hardened. "Don't act like you don't remember. You were the one who told me to stay out of your life. You called me annoying, said even the sound of my breathing disgusted you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. A terrible memory surfaced, one he wished he could forget. In his past life, he had been distant, even cruel to Elena. He had never appreciated her, never realized how much he had taken her for granted. The weight of regret settled over him like a crushing tide. "I'm sorry," Gin said quietly, sincerity thick in his voice. Belinda's mouth fell open. Her master apologizing first? That was unheard of. Elena, on the other hand, looked unconvinced. "Did you hit your head?" she asked bluntly. "I heard an orc landed a solid blow on you during the raid." Gin scowled. "Why does everyone keep saying that? I wasn't beaten. I was the one who took down the orcs." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a sharp pain shot through his body. His legs buckled and he collapsed. Elena smirked, arms crossed. "Oh yes, so impressive. And yet, here you are, trembling on the floor." Belinda snickered, and Elena joined in, the sight of Gin writhing in pain apparently amusing to them both. He stared at them, bewildered, but deep down, warmth stirred within him. He had missed this. missed them. But then a dark thought crept in. He remembered the festival happening next week. In his past life, he had rejected Elena's invitation to go, using the aftermath of the raid as an excuse. That had been the last time he ever saw her. Days later, her body had been found, torn apart along with her guards. The memory haunted him. Before he could dwell on it further, a knock at the door shattered his thoughts. Two armored men entered, Jamal and Philip, Elena's bodyguards. Jamal inclined his head. "Lady Elena, we're ready whenever you are." Elena sighed, rubbing her temple. "I told you to wait outside." Jamal looked sheepish. "Apologies, my lady, but the servants have asked for your help overseeing the festival preparations." Gin's brows furrowed. "Why are the maids asking you to do that?" Belinda rolled her eyes. "Because you're useless," she said flatly. "You spend all your time lazing around while the estate struggles. There's a workers' shortage. Genius." Gin stiffened. A shortage? That was news to him, but thinking back, it made sense. He had never once paid attention to the affairs of the estate before. Elena exhaled. "I need to go." She turned to leave, but Gin took a step forward. "I'll help," he said. Both Elena and Belinda stared at him as if he had just grown a second head. "You must have been hit really hard," Elena muttered. Later, as the town bustled with festival preparations, Gin trailed behind Elena despite her repeated protests. "You're just going to scare everyone," she huffed. He shrugged. "Is that really how you treat someone offering to help? If you really want to help, go back to the manor and stay out of the way," she snapped. Gin barely listened, his mind elsewhere. In his previous life, Elena's body had been discovered near the slums, far from the festival grounds. Someone had lured her there. But who? And why? If he wanted to prevent history from repeating itself, he needed to know every inch of the estate, every potential danger. His thoughts were interrupted when a soldier sprinted toward them, his voice carrying through the crowd. "My lord!" Gin turned, immediately recognizing the man. "Fergus!" The old soldier skidded to a stop, panting heavily. Sweat dripped from his brow, but his relief was evident. "Thank the heavens," he breathed. "You're alive." Fergus grabbed Gin's hands, his grip firm. "Forgive me, my lord. I came the moment I heard about the orcs. I am your loyal servant, always." Gin stared at him, his chest tightening. Fergus had been loyal even in his past life, yet Gin had never truly appreciated it. This time, things would be different. Gin, growing weary of the endless mentions of the raid, brushed off the conversation with an impatient wave. Elena, ever the opportunist, turned to Fergus with a knowing grin. She praised his prompt arrival before slyly adding that her brother had been acting strangely since regaining consciousness. With exaggerated concern, she pleaded with Fergus to escort Gin back to his quarters. The old soldier, seeing no reason to refuse, nodded in agreement. Gin, however, clenched his jaw in frustration. His reputation as a reckless troublemaker was proving to be more of a curse than he had anticipated. Even now, it hindered him from making decisions without interference. Realizing that pushing back would only deepen their suspicions, he chose a different approach. He would postpone his investigation of the castle for now. Instead, he turned to Fergus with a request of his own. "Take me to the old training grounds," he said firmly. Fergus hesitated, clearly taken aback. "The training grounds? Why?" Gin's expression was unwavering. "I want to train." The veteran soldier stared at him, scanning his face for any signs of deception. After a long pause, he finally exhaled and gestured for Gin to follow. Upon arrival, Gin found himself unexpectedly impressed. The training ground was in pristine condition, far better maintained than he had expected. Weapons were neatly arranged, the soil was firm but well kept, and not a single speck of dust marred the equipment. It was a stark contrast to the crude and worn-out facilities he had used during his mercenary years. Fergus watched Jin take in his surroundings before explaining, "It's always been ready, in case you ever decided to use it." His voice carried an air of quiet conviction. "I always believed you'd grow out of that reckless phase." Gin was momentarily at a loss for words. The old soldier's unwavering faith in him, despite everything, struck a chord deep within him. Smiling faintly, he reached out and tapped Fergus's armor. "I don't plan on dying anytime soon," he said, his tone lighter than before. Then his expression darkened slightly as he added, "Death is an experience I never want to go through again." Fergus stiffened at those words, studying Jin with narrowed eyes. "You talk as if you've already been through it," he said cautiously. Jin smirked, sharp as ever. He met Fergus's gaze and spoke plainly. "That's because I have. I died, and now I'm back." Fergus frowned, unimpressed. "I don't have time for nonsense, boy," Jin chuckled. "Then don't waste your time arguing with me. Just leave. I'm going to train." Though clearly skeptical, Fergus knew better than to push the matter. Bowing slightly, he took his leave. Once alone, Gin finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. His past life had been riddled with mistakes. He had treated those around him like obstacles or nuisances, failing to see the allies he had cast aside. That ignorance had cost him dearly. He remembered it all too well. Elena's murder had been orchestrated by a rival territory, a calculated move to provoke Perim into a war. That war had led to the downfall of their entire household. Her death had been the spark that set everything ablaze. But this time would be different. Determined to change fate, Gin steeled himself. Strength was the key. His body was still weak, but he had the knowledge and the experience to rebuild it. Time was limited, but he wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Settling into a lotus position, he focused inward. Mana, the mystical energy that allowed humans to transcend their natural limits, was notoriously difficult to sense, let alone control. But for Gin, it was as natural as breathing. Even in the heat of battle, he had always been able to weave mana as effortlessly as spinning thread. In his previous life, forming a single mana core had been a feat in itself, but Gin had gone beyond that. He had uncovered a forgotten technique, a method described in a half-burned grimoire. By forging multiple interconnected cores, he had pushed his strength to new heights. 2, 3, even 5 cores, all linked together in a network, had granted him an explosive edge in battle. He clenched his teeth as he forced the mana through his body, attempting to recreate the process. Agony ripped through him. Blood trickled from his nose and mouth, his vision blurring from the strain. When the pain finally subsided, he let out a bitter laugh. 3 cores. That was all he could manage. In his past life, he had reached 5. The technique was powerful, but it came with a cost. It demanded an enormous amount of mana, draining him faster than he could replenish it. It had been his downfall in his final battle. He could still remember it vividly. His duel with Iden, the noble knight. Iden had arrived with an entire order of warriors at his back. Gin had fought like a demon, but when his mana reserves finally ran dry, he had been overwhelmed. He had always believed he would have won if the battle had been fought on equal footing. His fists clenched. It didn't matter anymore. He was young again, stronger than before. This time, he would perfect the technique, refine it until it was flawless. A slow, smoldering rage burned in his chest as he vowed to take revenge, not just on Iden, but on the traitors who had orchestrated the destruction of House Delhi. This time, they would be the ones to fall. He swore that this time it would be him who delivered the final blow. The scene shifted to the day of the festival. Gin donned his gear and made his way to the bustling grounds, his mind focused. Elena, spotting her brother among the crowd, was visibly shocked to see him there. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concern coloring her voice as she approached him. "You've never shown any interest in these events before." Gin gave a calm, measured response. "As a member of the Perum household, it's important to attend gatherings like this from time to time." Elena eyed him with suspicion. "You've been acting strange lately," she remarked, her gaze narrowing. "I heard about your week-long training regimen. That's not like you." Gin hesitated for a moment, then explained with a nervous smile, "There's nothing odd about the air of a noble family training hard. It's just what's expected." Elena's eyes widened as she reminded him, "But you've never cared about any of this before. You even called Father annoying and said you couldn't wait to take his place." Gin's jaw dropped as he heard his own words echoed back to him. A bright smile spread across Elena's face as she continued, "I think I like the changes in you. It feels like you're becoming the brother I used to know." As Gin processed her words, he reflected on the past week. His actions had indeed begun to change the way people saw him, shaping not only how others perceived him, but also what the future might hold. While Gin was lost in thought, he noticed Belinda giving orders to Elena's bodyguards. She told them to handle any potential problems caused by Gin themselves, stressing the need to avoid trouble, especially with so many visitors around. The two guards nodded, assuring her that they could manage. Despite the smooth flow of the festival, Gin found it difficult to gauge how his actions affected the smaller details. For him, it became essential to respond to each situation appropriately, using the information at hand to make the right choices. He stayed close to his sister throughout the festival, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. Eventually, Elena took a seat, a thoughtful look on her face. "I've enjoyed the festival a little," she mused, "but it feels so repetitive. Is there anything new this year?" Gin couldn't shake the feeling that nothing unexpected had happened. He wondered if his mere presence had deterred any incidents. As he pondered this, a soldier approached Elena, suggesting they visit other parts of the festival where new events were reportedly taking place. His friend had mentioned them, and he invited Elena to join him. Surprised but intrigued, Elena took the soldier's hand, her excitement palpable at the prospect of exploring more activities. Gin, however, noticed something unsettling. The two soldiers accompanying them, Jamal and Philip, were traitors. Gin couldn't believe what he was seeing. The men who had once been his sister's most trusted knights, the ones who swore to protect her for as long as they lived, had now turned their backs on her. They'd been her defenders, ready to lay down their lives for her. But now, they were enemies. Jamal, with a grin plastered on his face, ushered Elena forward as though nothing were amiss. But the venue before them was deserted. No guests, no decorations, nothing. It was an empty stretch of road. "What's going on? There's no one here," Elena asked, her tone suspicious. Jamal brushed it off with a nervous chuckle. "The event's a bit delayed, but everyone will be here soon." Elena didn't buy it. "A performance in a place like this?" she mocked. Gin, his instincts on high alert, scanned the area. Everything about the situation felt wrong. The exits were blocked. This wasn't an accident. It was all planned. Elena tugged on his arm. "We need to go," she said. Jamal stopped her with an urgent gesture. "Just wait. It's worth it," he urged. But Elena wasn't convinced. "I'm not staying here," she replied firmly. Gin, trying to ease the tension, teased, "You've been hitting the gym. You look stronger today." Just as she was about to respond, Philip appeared, his face grim. "Hold on," Philip ordered, his voice sharp. Elena froze. "What's going on?" she demanded, voice shaking. Jamal, now visibly uneasy, offered a half-hearted apology. "Sorry for scaring you. We just had to bring you here." Before she could react, 3 men entered the scene. 2 wore black, while the leader stood apart, dressed in blue with a matching hat. Frank, the leader, looked at Jamal with a smug smile. "Well done," he said approvingly. "You've brought her, just as we agreed." Jamal puffed out his chest. "Our part's done. The deal's done." But Frank's eyes landed on Gin, his face darkening. "What's he doing here?" he growled. Elena stepped forward, fear creeping into her voice. "What's going on? What are you two planning?" Jamal's smile faltered. "We didn't plan for him to follow," he said. "But now he's here, he's walking into his death." Gin stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "You think you can escape this?" His voice was deadly calm. Jamal smirked. "We're leaving this place. You know, we've had enough of it. All the raids, the poverty. We're going somewhere far away." Gin's sword was out in a flash. He didn't hesitate. In an instant, he struck, slicing through Jamal's armor as if it were paper. Jamal collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Gin stood over him, voice cold. "Those who run away don't get to betray their own." Gin turned to Philip, who was already moving to grab Elena. Philip's face twisted with rage as he spat at Jamal's corpse. "Idiot," he muttered, disbelief and anger mixing in his voice. "A knight brought down by an amateur?" Before Philip could draw his sword, Gin was already on him. A single, clean strike ended his life, and he crumpled to the ground. Elena rushed to Gin's side, her eyes wide in horror. She glanced at the lifeless bodies of the 2 men who once pledged to protect her. One of the men in black turned to Frank, disbelief in his voice. "Is this really Gin?" Another man, still reeling from the shock, added, "But he's never trained? How can he? This isn't possible." Frank, though, wasn't fazed. "I don't know how he's doing it, but he's not your average fighter. His mana..." He glanced at Gin, impressed but wary. "This is no coincidence." Elena, trembling, turned to Gin. "What's happening? What are you doing?" Gin didn't answer. Instead, he struck her neck with a swift motion, knocking her out cold. He gently set her down, his expression cold. "Rest," he muttered. Frank, watching in surprise, took a long drag from his pipe. "Well, I didn't expect that. You've got some impressive tricks hidden up your sleeve." Gin wiped the blood off his sword, his eyes narrowing. "Why do you care about my abilities?" Frank smirked, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I'm just wondering how you've been hiding this power all this time." Gin's eyes flicked to the remaining men. The 2 in black were nothing compared to Frank. Gin could feel Frank's power radiating. It was on a whole different level. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. Gin released his own mana, preparing himself. He couldn't afford to hold back. One of Frank's men, still stunned, asked if they should kill Gin. Frank, shaking his head, said, "No, alive. Capture him alive and break him. We want him to suffer." Frank's grin widened. "His screams will be beautiful." The 2 men rushed at Gin. He was ready. A firecracker appeared in his hand, distracting one of them just long enough for Gin to close the gap and strike. The man fell, dead before he knew what hit him. The last man charged, calling Gin's previous attack a cheap move. Gin blocked his sword with ease, then decapitated him in one swift motion. Frank, undeterred, charged at Gin. Gin was ready. He used his second sword to deflect Frank's attack, then shoved Frank's sword to the side, delivering a blow that made Frank stumble. Frank, caught off guard, reinforced his neck with mana to avoid the fatal strike. "I'll give you credit," he said with a grin. "You're faster than I expected. If it weren't for my mana, you'd have killed me." Gin didn't respond. His sword was already raised. Frank's eyes narrowed, and he charged once again. Gin wasn't backing down. This was far from over. Shoving Gin back, Frank sneered at his feeble mana, arrogantly confident in his inevitable victory. However, Gin's smile in response unsettled him, causing Frank to hesitate in confusion. Seizing the moment, Gin parried Frank's sword and threw off his balance. He followed up with a swift kick to Frank's face, sending him stumbling backward. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Frank smirked and reminded Gin that his attacks were futile against his reinforced mana. Yet, moments later, Frank coughed violently and collapsed to his knees, stunned by the unexpected strength of Gin's blow. He struggled to comprehend how Gin's seemingly weak mana had bypassed his defenses. Gin slowly closed in, revealing that he had suspected someone of orchestrating his sister's death, but never imagined the true culprit. With a piercing gaze, Gin unleashed his third core, dramatically boosting his mana. Frank, visibly shaken, couldn't react in time before Gin appeared right in front of him, moving faster than Frank's eyes could follow. Gin's strikes came relentlessly, each one heavier than the last. Despite his best efforts, Frank's arms went numb under the assault, and his sword was close to breaking. Frank tried to regain his composure, reminding himself that excessive mana surges usually had limited effects, but Gin's burst defied all logic. It was as though Gin had completely transformed. Seeing Frank faltering, Gin shattered the assassin's weapon with a decisive strike. Without hesitation, he drove his sword deep into Frank's torso, causing Frank to cry out in agony. Gin silenced him by grabbing his throat and pinning him against the wall, his sword still embedded. He demanded answers, insisting that Frank reveal who had ordered the assassination. Frank refused, instead producing a hidden blade and swearing to take Elena with him, determined to inflict more harm before his death. Before he could act, strings wrapped around his wrist, halting his movement. Gin, controlling the strings with cold precision, warned Frank not to make any rash moves. Gin then proposed a deal, offering to sheath his sword if Frank complied and refrained from further resistance. Frank, stunned, realized the threads binding him were made of mana, something he couldn't fathom how Gin had created with such precision. Gin drove his sword deeper into Frank's body and remarked that someone of Frank's skill should be able to patch up the injury. His voice was cold as he warned that once Frank's mana core was destroyed, no amount of healing would matter. Panic flashed in Frank's eyes as he looked down and saw Gin's sword glowing ominously. The assassin screamed in pain, accusing Gin of madness and claiming the backflow of mana could cause a catastrophic explosion, wiping out the entire area. He questioned whether Gin intended to self-destruct. Gin, with unflinching calm, replied that only the unskilled made such mistakes and assured Frank that he had complete control over the situation. Frank, realizing Gin wasn't bluffing, accepted his impending death and screamed, revealing that Count Desmond had orchestrated the assassination. The Count, Frank explained, sought to ignite a war between the Perum and Deard families. Gin was taken aback by this revelation. Such schemes were usually carried out by families allied with Duke Deline. The fact that the Duke was pulling strings from the shadows, remaining uninvolved, infuriated him. Gin demanded to know if this was the reason Frank had targeted his sister, to which Frank confirmed with a grim smile. Without hesitation, Gin drove his sword through Frank's body, causing Frank to cough up blood. Frank, with his last breath, reminded Gin of his earlier promise to put the sword away. Gin smirked and asked why Frank, who had taken so many lives, was now afraid of death. Frank laughed, catching Gin off guard, and moved closer. He declared that his death would change nothing. The Deard family's mission was accomplished and Perum was doomed to ruin. He sneered, questioning whether anyone would listen to someone like Gin. As Frank taunted him, Gin grabbed his head and slammed it against the wall with a sinister smile. Gin declared that his rebirth after death meant everything would be different this time. His sword began to glow brighter, and Frank's screams filled the air. A burst of energy erupted from Frank's mouth, and the explosion lit up the sky like fireworks. Moments later, Frank's lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Gin, breathing heavily, surveyed the scene. Bodies scattered, his sister unconscious and safe. Satisfied that no one else was nearby, he discarded his sword, took a deep breath, and collapsed to his knees, coughing up blood. Wiping his mouth, Gin muttered that detonating 3 mana cores had once been effortless for him. Steeling himself, he rose, vowing not to fall here. Heading to a nearby building, he kicked open the door and found 2 bodies inside. In his previous life, a 3rd body had been discovered here alongside Elena's. This time, based on Frank's earlier words, Gin identified one of the bodies as the son of the Degard family. The boy had been murdered alongside his escort knight, their deaths staged to frame Elena. Gin moved the bodies, knowing that revealing them would undoubtedly spark a war. Deciding to eliminate all evidence, he set the building ablaze with a firecracker, watching the flames consume the damning proof. Gin then carried his sister and began walking away, determined to ensure that his enemies would never succeed in their plans. Unbeknownst to Gin, a figure hidden in the trees observed his every move. After watching for a moment, the person disappeared into the shadows. The setting shifted to a round table, where the observer informed a group of high-ranking officials about the failure of the assassination. The members of the council appeared rattled, struggling to understand how Frank and the two knights had failed in their mission. The council members interrogated the spy, accusing him of underestimating the task, assuming it would be an easy success. The spy nervously admitted that their failure was due to Gin, a revelation that stunned the men at the table. They found it hard to believe that the so-called useless bastard of the North could achieve anything noteworthy. One member dismissed the accusation, claiming that blaming Gin was merely an excuse for failure, and demanded the spy stop using him as a scapegoat. However, the spy insisted that Gin was not like the reports and rumors had portrayed him, recalling how Gin had dealt with their men. The spy explained that Gin appeared to be an entirely different person. He reassured his superiors that their plans to eliminate the D-Guard family were still intact, and that starting a territorial war would not be difficult. Pleading for another opportunity, the spy promised to fix his mistake. The council, unimpressed, silenced him, scolding him for his failure to gather sufficient intelligence on a single individual. They condemned him for delaying their plans and were outraged by his request for another chance after such a failure. The group decided to eliminate the spy, but before the order was carried out, a man sitting on a throne intervened. His voice cut through the noise, and he dismissed the commotion as tiresome, asking the spy to explain what kind of opportunity he was requesting. The spy confidently assured the man that he could eliminate Gin. When asked how, the spy proposed arranging a duel. He explained that he had someone in mind for the task, and the council demanded to know the identity of this individual. The spy revealed that his choice was Cain Lois, a young man renowned for his strength-based swordsmanship and widely regarded as a paragon of raw power. The spy argued that no one in the North could match Cain's strength and assured the council that setting up the duel would be easy, as Cain was Gin's cousin. The man on the throne, fixing the spy with a cold gaze, warned that there would be no more chances if he failed again. The spy swore not to disappoint. The scene then shifted to the training hall of the Perham household, where Fergus entered the room to inform his master that it was time for a meal. As soon as he spoke, something flew toward him. Gin, practicing with his mana thread, had wrapped the thread around the sword near the entrance and pulled it toward himself. He carefully observed his own movements, testing the thread's handling as he swung the sword, fine-tuning his control. Fergus approached, apologizing for interrupting the training session, and asked how his master had managed to pull the sword. Gin showed him the mana thread and explained that it was a technique for manipulating mana as a string. He recounted that in his past life, he had relied on this method extensively, but in his current state, his limited mana reserves required him to implode his core to use the technique effectively. Ghazan noted that Gin's lack of mana now restricted him to creating fewer threads. Fergus, visibly impressed, admitted that he had never seen such a technique before. Despite believing himself to be well-trained in mana manipulation, he was puzzled by how Gin, whom he had considered unskilled and untrained, could master such an advanced method. Noticing Fergus's lingering presence, Gin asked if he needed something. Fergus replied that he had stopped by to deliver some news and bowed his head, expressing his gratitude to Gin for protecting his younger sister. Gin, surprised by the old man's gesture, replied that he had merely done what was necessary and invited Fergus to join him for a meal. The next day, the festival was temporarily halted, as expected, following the incident involving a knight's attempt to traffic the young lady inside the castle. Helena voiced her frustration to her brother, lamenting that no one believed her when she said he had saved her. She urged Gin to speak up and set the record straight. Gin reassured her that it wasn't necessary, adding that no one would believe him either. Belinda, overhearing the conversation, was visibly irritated. She expressed her disgust at Jamal and Philly, declaring that she had always suspected the two knights were perverts and accusing them of trying to take Elena for their own gain. Jin, meanwhile, felt a sense of relief knowing his sister had survived the ordeal and that he had managed to avert the potential war. Despite that, he was acutely aware that their enemies would not let up easily. Realizing that he couldn't confront these threats on his own for much longer, Gin concluded that it was essential to create his own military force. As he contemplated his next course of action, a maid entered the room with a food cart. She set a plate before him, and when Gin uncovered it, he was startled to find just a single slice of bread. Surprised, he turned to Belinda and inquired when they would have dessert. The maid, shocked by his question, asked if he was truly unaware of their dire situation. Before Gin could respond, loud shouting from outside caught his attention. Stunned by the noise coming from the castle gates, he paused for a moment. A plump man with a beard was demanding compensation from the Perum household for the losses incurred by the sudden cancellation of the festival. He wasn't alone. Other angry men joined him, holding pitchforks and shouting similar demands. They called out for Gin and Elena to appear, accusing them of wasting the county's money. The guards attempted to calm the crowd. Gin peered out the window to assess the situation, struggling to understand the source of the unrest. Belinda, standing beside him, explained the situation. She told him that the county's economy heavily relied on merchants, whose prosperity depended on the profits generated by the festival. While last year's event had been profitable, this year's sudden cancellation had left many merchants in distress, and their anger was understandable. Gin was taken aback, not realizing how fragile the county's financial situation had become. Recognizing the potential danger if the merchant's anger continued to escalate, he decided to take action. He turned to Fergus and asked about the soldiers' current status, ordering him to deploy them to quell the disturbance. However, Fergus revealed that there were no soldiers available. Gin was shocked by this news, and Fergus explained that most of their forces had been sent to the Forest of Monsters for reconstruction after an orc raid. Frustration spread across Jin's face as he processed the situation. Perum was caught in an ongoing struggle, squeezed between barbarian raids from the north and the looming threat of monsters from the forest on the other side. The difficulties of governing the region were becoming clearer by the day, and Gin realized that swift and strategic action was necessary to manage the growing unrest. Struggling to accept their harsh reality, no money and no soldiers, he pulled Belinda aside and reminded her that she was responsible for managing his finances. He asked her to use any remaining funds to appease the merchants. Belinda, visibly shocked, informed him that there were no funds left. Stunned, Gin demanded an explanation, and Belinda reminded him that the Count had cut off his allowance due to his previous reckless spending. Realizing he was financially broke, Gin pleaded with Belinda to lend him some money, but she admitted that she, too, had no cash. The scene shifted to Gin, gazing out the window at the town below, his mind racing. He couldn't believe how precarious their situation had become. Without money, even his foreknowledge of the future seemed to offer no advantage. Gin began to wonder if there was anything in their current situation that could change their fortunes. As he pondered this, Ricardo suddenly burst into the room, breathless. Startled, Gin asked why he was in such a rush. Ricardo, visibly distressed, informed him that there was an issue. Kane wanted to see him. The mention of Kane shocked Gin. The scene shifted once more to Scoven, who was struggling to stay on his feet. His face was battered and his opponent struck him again, delivering a blow so powerful it pierced his chest plate and sent him crashing to the ground. Outside the tavern, Gin arrived just in time to witness the commander's collapse. Scoven, noticing Gin, weakly called out. Gin, irritated by the sight, turned his gaze to Kane, who greeted him with a wide grin. Facing Gin was a towering young man, Kane Lowes, the heir to Lowes County. Gin recognized him immediately, memories of their past flashing through his mind. Kane had always been a mix of friend and rival, a figure who stood both beside and above him. As Kane strode up the stairs, Gin turned to Ricardo for an explanation. Ricardo wasted no time in revealing the situation. He and Sken had come to the tavern to investigate reports of an incident. Upon arrival, they had stumbled upon Kane and his personal knight. Kane, having recognized them, had immediately begun asking questions about the rumors surrounding Gin. When Skov had tried to explain, Kane had cut him off with a sinister smirk, gripping his jaw tightly. Without hesitation, he accused Skov of daring to deceive the heir of Lowe's County, then proceeded to pummel him. With Skov subdued, Kane turned his attention to Ricardo, demanding the truth. The rumors claimed that Gin, a man with no formal training, had somehow managed to defeat an orc with his bare hands and take down a group of treasonous knights single-handedly. Kane scoffed, dismissing the story as absurd. He claimed he had only been trying to teach the commander a lesson to bring him back to reality. Then his gaze shifted fully to Gin, his lips curling into a sneer. He accused him outright, saying that none of this chaos would have unfolded if Gin hadn't spread lies. Gin's mind wandered back to his past encounters with Kane. His arrogant cousin had always looked down on him, treating him like an underling rather than an equal. Every time Kane visited Param, trouble followed in his wake, yet no one dared to challenge him due to his status. His confidence and reckless nature were celebrated as signs of a future leader, while Gin's quiet demeanor was seen as weakness. Yet, instead of reacting with anger, Gin did something unexpected. He smiled. Kane's expression faltered for a split second. He had been expecting fury, perhaps even an impulsive attack, but certainly not this. Hours earlier in Lowe's County, a spy had approached Kane with an intriguing proposition: eliminate Gin. Initially, Kane had been taken aback, but curiosity kept him listening. The spy assured him that if he succeeded, those in power, the ones who truly mattered, would back his family. Kane had considered the request. Defeating Gin wasn't a challenge, but outright killing the heir of another noble house was no simple matter. He had questioned how such an act could be pulled off without causing an uproar. The spy had reassured him with a simple plan. They would lure Gin into a duel and orchestrate his death to appear as an unfortunate accident. The fight would seem like a mere dispute between noble heirs, nothing more. Kane had listened carefully, weighing the opportunity. Then, with a slow, wicked grin, he had realized the truth. This wasn't just a chance to defeat his cousin, it was a chance to end him. At this very moment, Kane found himself wondering why the shadowy organization wanted Gin eliminated. He had a strong suspicion that something about his cousin had changed. A smirk tugged at his lips as he turned to Gin and asked why he was just standing there so casually on the stairs. His tone shifted, becoming more demanding. He insisted that Gin bring whatever he had prepared. Gin, confused, tilted his head and asked Kane what he meant. With an amused chuckle, Kane reminded him of the festival's interruption and insisted they should make up for it by having some fun. He spoke as if they were still partners in crime, bringing chaos wherever they went. With a dark gleam in his eyes, Kane asked if he was wrong. Unfazed by his cousin's imposing presence, Gin took a moment to think. Then, it clicked. Kane was referring to alcohol and women, the same indulgences he had forced Gin to provide for him during his past visits. Back then, Gin had obeyed without question, fearing the consequences of refusal. He had drained his own funds to meet Kane's demands, which suddenly made Belinda's earlier warning make sense. His father had cut him off due to reckless spending. As the realization settled in, Gin couldn't help but smile. The solution to his financial troubles had been in front of him all along. Kane's voice snapped him back to reality. Growing impatient, he called out again, demanding what was owed. Gin met his gaze and assured him he'd have what he wanted soon. But there was another matter to settle first. His eyes sharpened as he spoke, making even the spy observing from the shadows flinch. Kane frowned, clearly caught off guard. He asked what Gin was getting at. With an eerily calm smile, Gin explained that all the lavish entertainment Cain had enjoyed in the past hadn't come for free. Every luxury had been funded from Gin's own pocket, and now it was time for repayment, a hefty sum of 1,000 gold. Cain's expression twisted with disbelief. He scoffed, arguing that the costs couldn't have exceeded 100 gold. Laughing, he dismissed the demand, calling it nothing more than a token of friendship. Gin's smirk widened. "You really are an idiot," he remarked. "You've always treated me like a doormat." The mood in the tavern shifted as Jin leaned in slightly. "I'll give you a choice," he said coldly. "Pay up now, or I'll take it out of you another way." The entire room fell silent. Onlookers gawked at the audacity of Gin's words. Cain's companions bristled, one of them stepping forward and accusing Gin of acting out simply because Cain had been lenient with him. The noble heir himself scoffed at the idea that Gin had truly gotten stronger. He called him a fraud, claiming he had spread false rumors about defeating knights in battle. With a sneer, Cain went further, labeling Gin a parasite, a disgrace to the north. Then, with a clenched fist, he barked at Gin to pull himself together. Without warning, Cain swung. Gin moved like a shadow, easily sidestepping the blow. The bystanders, including Ricardo and the spy, looked on in shock. Cain, frustrated, adjusted his stance and aimed for Gin's head this time. But once again, Gin avoided it, ducking low before delivering a sharp counterstrike to Cain's ribs. A grunt of pain escaped Cain as he staggered back, disbelief flashing across his face. Gin didn't hesitate. He threw another punch, this time aimed at Cain's head. At the last second, Cain managed to block it with his palm, his lips curling into a triumphant smile. The moment was short-lived. Cain's expression twisted in agony as he collapsed to his knees, clutching his hand. A scream tore from his throat. The spy rushed to his side, alarmed. "Cain, are you all right?" Gin, unimpressed, rolled his eyes. "Quit whining. You blocked the hit, didn't you?" The spy's gaze snapped toward Gin, his expression darkening. "Stay away from him," he warned. The tavern remained deathly silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Cain, once seen as an untouchable force, had been brought low before their very eyes. Cain, however, had no intention of letting this humiliation go unanswered. He shot a subtle glance at the spy and whispered under his breath, "Was that convincing?" The spy's lips curled into a sly grin. "Perfect," he murmured. "Everything is in place." With that, Cain steadied himself and reached into his coat. From his pocket, he pulled out a blue glove, a symbol of noble duels. He raised it high, voice steady despite the pain. "Gin, you've disgraced the nobility. You struck without provocation. You." Before he could finish, Gin's own glove smacked him in the face. The tavern gasped. Gin tilted his head, his smile unshaken. "Cain Lowe's," he said smoothly, "you just insulted an heir and attacked my knight. In doing so, you've tarnished the dignity of the nobility." His eyes gleamed. "Do you intend to deny it?" Cain clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath before letting out a laugh. He had always thought Gin was a fool, but he hadn't expected him to dig his own grave this thoroughly. With a slow, deliberate motion, Cain drew his sword. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "If you want a duel, I'll give you one." His eyes darkened with promise. "And I'll make sure you regret it." His grip tightened on his blade. "Even if it costs me my life." Gin called out to Ricardo, who immediately responded to his command. Gin instructed him to bring the merchants who were protesting outside the castle, though Ricardo hesitated, clearly taken aback. Gin, now wearing a smile tinged with madness, reassured Ricardo that the merchants would make a substantial profit from this arrangement. Gin had realized that the cancellation of the festival had left both merchants and tourists frustrated, but he was confident that an event like this would reignite their excitement and ease the tension that had built up in the town. The scene shifted to a makeshift stage where Gin and Khan stood poised for a duel. The crowd around them buzzed with anticipation, eager to witness the confrontation. Many of them were eager to see Gin humiliated. and the atmosphere was charged with excitement. Merchants had reopened their stalls, selling goods to the eager tourists who had returned for the spectacle. Among the crowd, a rotund merchant loudly encouraged people to place bets, certain that Khan would emerge victorious. Confident in Khan's superiority, the merchants placed heavy wagers in his favor. Khan, resting his enormous sword on the ground, looked at Gin and questioned why he had turned a sacred duel into some kind of marketplace display. With a sinister grin, he warned Gin that his sword would not stop, even if Gin surrendered. Gin, unfazed, simply pointed out that enough people had gathered, signaling the beginning of the duel. Just as the fight was about to begin, a spy stepped forward, halting the proceedings. He argued that the bets couldn't proceed without a proper wager on Gin's side. The chubby merchant revealed to the crowd that no one had placed a bet on Gin, a fact that didn't surprise anyone. After all, most believed it would be foolish to wager on Gin considering the odds. Khan mocked Gin, laughing that even his own people didn't trust him. Undeterred, the chubby merchant suggested a different type of bet. They could wager on how long Gin would last against Khan. At that moment, Scovin, supported by Ricardo, stepped forward and placed a heavy bag of gold on the table, declaring his bet on Gin. The crowd was stunned by this bold move. Elena, too, approached, dropping an even larger bag of gold, announcing that she was betting on her brother. This move caught even Gin by surprise. When the merchant was asked if the amount was enough, he confirmed it was. Belinda, who had been standing nearby, reminded Elena that she had warned against making such a bold bet. Kane, growing increasingly irritated by the delay, demanded that the duel begin immediately. The referee signaled the start of the fight, and Gin, with a quick glance at his cousin, reminded Khan that, as his elder cousin, it would appear strange for him to make the first move. This statement confused Khan, who retorted that it was far too late for Gin to pretend to be the older brother. As the referee gave the signal, Khan charged forward, using his weight and momentum to swing his massive sword at Gin. Gin was able to block the strike, but he was shocked by the sheer force and weight of the weapon. With a taunting smile, Khan mocked Gin, claiming that he had sunk so low he no longer even acted like an elder sibling. Khan shoved Gin back with the hilt of his sword, then immediately followed up by swinging it toward Gin's head. Gin ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, but Khan was relentless, following up with a powerful kick. Gin managed to avoid the kick, but the force of Khan's leg shattered the ground beneath them, causing the crowd to gasp in awe. It was clear that Khan's strength was overwhelming, and he showed no signs of giving Gin even a moment to recover or counterattack. With a cocky grin, Khan reveled in his own strength, clearly enjoying the feeling of dominance. Gin, however, remained unshaken by the display of power. He noted his cousin's pride, but it did not intimidate him. On the other hand, Belinda, witnessing the brutal display, began to panic. She grabbed Elena's arm and urged her to stop the fight. Nearby, the spy smiled knowingly, confident that it was already too late. He understood Khan's strategy perfectly. Overwhelming strength combined with relentless attacks would force Gin into a defensive position, leaving him exhausted and vulnerable. The spy knew that once Gin was worn down, Khan would strike the final blow. It was a strategy Khan had honed over time, and he had always emerged victorious using it. As Khan's attacks grew more intense, it seemed that Gin was running out of options. Gin nimbly dodged Kane's attacks with remarkable agility, evading his cousin's strikes. Kane, watching the evasive moves, remarked with a smirk that Gin remained as slippery as ever. He acknowledged that his cousin had certainly grown stronger since their last fight and decided to change his approach. Without warning, Kane grabbed his sword by the blade and swung the hilt toward Gin, mocking him. He reminded Gin that, as always, he had been exceptional at running away ever since their childhood days. Gin managed to parry the attack with his own sword, but Kane used the hilt to push Gin into the air, sending him soaring. The crowd gasped in collective disbelief, expecting this to be the end of the duel. The spy, watching intently, allowed himself a smug grin, sure that victory was already in Kane's grasp. As Gin descended, however, he muttered under his breath that he had intended to go easy on his cousin. But Cain had crossed the line. Gathering his energy, Gin focused his mana into his legs, steadying himself as he landed with precision. He immediately surged toward Cain, catching his cousin off guard with a sudden burst of speed. Cain gasped in pain as Gin's blade sank into his stomach. The spy, stunned by the turn of events, realized that Gin had cleverly used his mana to regain his footing and move with incredible speed. Gin taunted Cain, accusing him of being foolish and ignorant in his swordplay. He pointed out that Cain had grown arrogant, believing himself invincible simply because his opponents feared his strength. Taking a more solid stance, Gin vowed to show his cousin the error of his ways. Furious, Cain charged at Gin, swinging his sword with fury, but Gin swiftly countered by kicking Cain's blade to knock him back. Before Cain could recover, Gin leapt aside, narrowly avoiding another strike. He then delivered a precise blow to Cain's shoulder, striking the hand that held the sword. Cain, struggling to retaliate, thrust his sword forward in a desperate attempt to recover, but Gin anticipated the move. With a graceful sidestep, Gin pressed the blade down with his foot, and in a single, fluid motion, landed a cut close to Cain's neck. Blood began to trickle from the shallow wound Gin had left, leaving the audience in stunned silence. Then, as if on cue, cheers erupted. No one had expected Gin to display such expertise, and many in the crowd began to regret betting on Cain. Elena, pleased by the unexpected turn of events, pointed it out to Belinda, who smiled knowingly. Meanwhile, Cain, noticing the wound on his neck, realized it was a shallow cut. He deduced that Gin had held back, knowing that he could have inflicted far worse damage if he had wanted to. Confusion clouded Cain's thoughts. How had Gin become so skilled? He couldn't understand it. Gin locked eyes with his cousin, throwing his sword aside in a bold move that shocked the crowd. He declared that the difference in their skills was too vast for the duel to continue with swords. Turning to Cain, Gin informed him that they would now fight without weapons. Cain, visibly irked by Gin's challenge, demanded an explanation. Gin, maintaining his calm demeanor, explained that he saw this duel as a chance to teach his cousin a lesson. Rolling up his sleeves, he declared that the lesson would be delivered with his bare hands. Cain, taken aback, was momentarily speechless. Gin clarified further, telling Cain that his swordsmanship was far superior, and if Cain wanted a real challenge, he would need to fight without a weapon. Gin suggested they engage in a hand-to-hand combat duel, an area where Cain was more skilled. With a firm and unwavering voice, Ghazan declared that he would double the original wager, boldly adding 1,000 gold. His confidence in victory was absolute. The crowd gasped at this unexpected turn, struggling to comprehend Gin's audacity in raising the stakes so drastically. Among them, the spy was the most shocked. He found it almost impossible to believe that Gin had the nerve to challenge Cain to a bare-handed fight. Yet, despite his disbelief, he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction, convinced that Gin's recklessness had played right into his hands. As the fight was set to begin, the rotund merchant wasted no time, inviting spectators to place additional bets and announcing that the match had officially become a bare-handed contest. Opinions among the onlookers were sharply divided. Some dismissed Gin's decision as foolish, believing he stood no chance against Cain in raw strength. Others suspected he had a plan and placed their wagers on him instead. Cain, meanwhile, was stunned by his cousin's choice. After a brief hesitation, he simply shrugged and allowed Gin to do as he pleased. Removing his coat, he lifted his sword, his expression hardening as he made his intentions clear. Without warning, he lunged at Gin. Watching from the sidelines, Belinda clicked her tongue in frustration. "Master, pick up your weapon and end this," she urged. But Gin remained calm. As Cain's sword came slicing toward him with lethal intent, Gin dodged effortlessly, a smirk playing on his lips. It was clear to him now. Cain needed a lesson. Cain swung again, but Gin swiftly dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blade. As Cain tried to adjust, Gin moved to his side in a flash, delivering a solid punch to his thigh. Before Cain could react, another crushing blow landed on his jaw, sending him stumbling backward and collapsing to the ground. For a moment, Cain lay there, dazed. He couldn't fathom how Gin, the cousin he had always considered beneath him, had executed such precise, effortless movements. The crowd erupted in astonishment, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, the idea of Gin winning no longer seemed impossible. Standing over his fallen cousin, Gin's gaze was steady, his voice calm but firm. "Get up, we've barely started." Cain's blood boiled at those words. Snarling, he charged again, swinging his sword with reckless fury. But no matter how many times he slashed, Gin evaded each attack with ease. Then, in a single fluid motion, Gin caught Cain's arm, twisted it sharply, and locked him in place. Before Cain could counter, Gin drove his knee into his ribs, forcing a gasp of pain from his lips. Blood splattered from Cain's mouth as he staggered, disoriented. He couldn't process it. Gin, the cousin who had always bowed to him, always stayed in his shadow, was now dominating him with ease. It was humiliating, yet Cain refused to accept it. He had been certain that this fight would be an easy victory, one that would secure his family's standing. But Gin showed no mercy. He pressed his advantage relentlessly, unleashing blow after blow with no pause, no chance for Cain to recover. By the time Gin finally stepped back, Cain's face was swollen, his entire body bruised. Trembling, he looked up at his cousin, who now towered over him with an air of quiet dominance. Gin grabbed Cain by the hair, his voice low. "Your father was a man of honor. Count Lowe's stood by my father through ruin and hardship, all because of loyalty and friendship. But you," his grip tightened, "you chose a different path." A memory surfaced, a moment from years ago. He had stood before his father, seething with frustration as they argued. "Why?" he had demanded. "Why do you keep sending aid to Perum? Our own county is struggling." His father had met his anger with quiet resolve. "Because Count Perum is my friend," he had said simply. The memory faded as Cain returned to the present, just in time to see Gin's fist flying toward his face. Instinctively, he shut his eyes, but the blow never came. When he dared to look, Gin was standing before him, hand extended. "It's over," he said. Cain stared at him for a long moment. Then, head bowed, he exhaled shakily. "I lost." The crowd erupted in disbelief. Gin's name was chanted over and over, his victory sending shockwaves through the gathered spectators. Those who had bet on Cain cursed their misfortune, while those who had believed in Gin cheered in triumph. Among them, Elena beamed with pride at her brother's unexpected success. Meanwhile, Belinda and the two soldiers beside her stood frozen, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Then, in the midst of the celebration, the spy stormed onto the stage, his face contorted with rage. He approached Cain, his voice a furious snarl. "Why did you surrender?" he demanded. "You were barely at a disadvantage." Cain didn't even lift his head. "I'm done," he said simply. "Let's go." The spy fumed, his fists clenching, but before he could say more, Gin's voice cut through the tension. With a confident smirk, Gin turned to the crowd. "A round of meat and drinks for everyone," he announced. "Courtesy of our generous friend here." The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating their young master's generosity. The spy's eyes widened in horror. "What? I never agreed to that." Gin clapped a firm hand on the man's shoulder, his grip tightening just enough to send a message. "Consider it the price of losing," he said smoothly. "And don't worry, this isn't coming out of the betting pot. This is an additional contribution." His voice turned cold. "And if you try to run, you won't like the consequences." A shudder ran through the spy. He hesitated for only a moment before dropping to his knees. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll pay." The following day, in the quiet of his room, Gin placed a large box on the table. As he lifted the lid, his breath hitched slightly at the sight. Stacks of gold coins, his winnings from the bet. The sheer amount was staggering. This could fund an entire mercenary corps, he murmured to himself. Yet he knew the difficulty of amassing such wealth again. His enemies wouldn't wait. He had to act, and he had to act fast. As he sat in contemplation, Elena and Belinda entered, exchanging glances before hesitantly stepping forward. Gin noticed their nervous expressions and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" Elena's lips curled into a bright smile. "Brother, what are you going to do with all that money?" Gin chuckled. "Why? Do you want some?" Elena shook her head. "Just curious." Belinda, however, smirked knowingly. I already know what you're planning, she teased. Lady Amelia's birthday is coming up, isn't it? This whole grand display. You did it just to buy her an extravagant gift, didn't you? Gin blinked, taken aback. Elena gasped. Wait, you're working this hard just to impress your fiancé? Jin froze. Fiancé? For a moment, he looked completely lost, as if he had no idea what they were talking about. Jin turned to his sister for clarification, but Belinda, clearly amused, urged him to drop the act. There was no need to feign ignorance out of embarrassment. Elena then stepped in, reminding him that they were talking about Amelia from Rail County. The mention of the county's name caused Jin's expression to darken. He vividly recalled Amelia Rold, a noblewoman he once likened to a spider. Amelia Rold had been widely admired for her kindness and selflessness, winning the unwavering support of her people. Yet, in time, she would become infamous for leading a rebellion, earning the title the Witch of the North. Aligning herself with the Deline, she played a crucial role in the downfall of Pam. To Gin, she was nothing less than a traitor. A faint smirk crossed his lips as he turned to Belinda, casually asking when their father was expected to return. She informed him that their father, the Lord, would be back in a week. That time frame was sufficient. Rising from his seat, Jin announced his intention to visit Rold County. Belinda, surprised, pointed out that Amelia's birthday was still some time away and asked why he planned to go. Jin simply stated that he needed to secure funds from the county. The scene shifted to a striking noblewoman stepping onto the ground, her shoes left behind. She had piercing red eyes and a small spider tattoo near her mouth. It was Amelia. She handed her shoes to a ragged young girl who stared at them in disbelief, struggling to comprehend that Amelia was gifting them to her. With a serene expression, Amelia remarked that only she deserved to walk barefoot on this land. Then, turning to her soldiers, she instructed them to provide food and shelter for the people gathered around. Without hesitation, her men set to work distributing provisions, leaving the crowd in awe. As Amelia departed, grateful voices rose in thanks for her generosity. The scene transitioned again, this time to the lush garden of Rold Manor. A man knelt before